Hello, and thanks so much for joining the Invisible Americans podcast with Jeff Madrick and Carol Jenkins. We address the travesty of child poverty here.
There are nearly 13 million children living in serious material deprivation in America, and we don't see them. They are our invisible Americans, and we plan to change that.
A couple of words about us. The podcast is based on Jeff's book, Invisible Americans, The Tragic Cost of Child Poverty. He's an economics writer, author of 7, and co-author of another 4 books on the American economy.
And Carol is an Emmy-winning journalist, activist, and author, most recently president of the ERA Coalition, working to amend the Constitution to include women.
And we are longtime colleagues and friends.
Our first guest today is Dr. Catherine Eden. Dr. Eden is one of the country's most respected researchers and writers on poverty. She is a professor of sociology and public affairs at Princeton University and director of its Center for Research on Child Well-Being.
Her book, $2 a Day, The Art of Living on Virtually Nothing in America, co-authored with Luke Schaefer, was met with wide critical acclaim. It was included in the New York Times 100 Notable Books of 2015, cited as essential reporting about the rise in destitute families. She is a member of both the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences. We talked with her about her surprising discovery of people in this country who were, and some still are, living on next to nothing. Thank you so much, Catherine, for being with us today. I understand that you and Jeff Madrick have met before.
We have. I was at the launch of his book in New York and was really pleased to be able to say a few words along with David Harris about the book. So, of course, we've been back and forth by email, maybe even by phone, but that was a great event.
Yeah, he's been bragging about it ever since, Catherine.
Well, I haven't, but I've been grateful ever since. I really appreciate your showing up to do that. That was great. So I think maybe we should begin by asking you how you came upon, you were always partners with Luke Schaefer. You were always one of the foremost sociologists in the country about poor people, if not the foremost. And yet it seemed what you discovered over the years of interviewing people is that suddenly the nature of poverty changed, or it seemed almost suddenly, and now nobody, and I exaggerate, nobody had cash anymore.
Yeah.
And that astounded you, I think.
It did.
And you contacted Luke and decided, let's do a little homework and see if we can quantify. What did you discover?
I've been doing these interviews in Baltimore in 2012. We've been following a sample of young people who had been born in public housing, but who'd gotten a voucher. Some of them had gotten a voucher to move out of public housing, some hadn't. And we've been following these young people for, over a decade. And they were about 19, 20 when we came back in the summer of 2013 to talk to them. And very, very poor, disadvantaged group of people. And over again, we kept running into people with no stream of cash income, none from work, none from TANF, what we call our welfare program today. Sometimes not even food stamps, although many did have food stamps. And, I had spent my 20s interviewing low-income single mothers, half of them welfare reliant and half wage reliant in the years before welfare reform. And there was really no one in this category that I ran into, somebody without any source of cash income. So, I'd done all this work in my early 20s on welfare. The world had changed. I'd gone on to study different topics. So it just occurred to me, could it be that in the aftermath of welfare reform, a new form of poverty had emerged, and one so deep that we hadn't even thought to look for it? So it was at this moment that Luke Schaefer appeared in my office. I was teaching at Harvard at the time. he had arranged to be a visiting fellow at Harvard, and I'd arranged to sponsor him, but I'd forgotten. So when he showed up in my office, I was struggling to think of something to say. And so I told him this story about what I'd been observing in the field. And he said, "Oh, I am just the, is this a thing, or is this a one-off? Is this just something odd that happened in my interviews in Baltimore?" And so he says, "Oh, I have the algorithm all set up. I can tell you the answer to this question." And if you know anything about Luke, he loves data, and he's one of the nation's experts on the best source of data to look at income, the survey of income and program participation. So he came back 2 days later, and we sat in the office just with our mouths open. He saw this just sharp rise in the number of families with children who had been interviewed by this very, very, very intensive, detailed 12-hour, survey instrument. And they were reporting little or no cash income. We call this extreme poverty, $2 a day poverty in the book, but it was a stunning finding. Then, of course, we decided we had to see if this was real on the ground. And so we traveled across the country, meeting people who were living on this virtually no cash income and following them for many months and years.
Catherine, the beauty of the book consists in the stories that you are able to tell, the picture you are able to paint to make it real.
Yeah.
Here we talk about invisible Americans, and that you brought visibility in a real time way to the people you were talking with, and in a very human way too. And I think that your astonishment that here you found all of these people with no cash in a capitalist society, and how exactly does this work out?
Yeah. I was just reading, because I'm teaching a course on poverty, about the 1890s. And something like this happened back then too, because there was just staunch opposition to what was called outdoor relief at the time. And so places like Brooklyn, New York, just wiped it out. The assumption was that people would just figure it out. But of course, what we found in our book, $2 a day, through these stories, is that the price families, and especially children, pay for living with virtually no cash income is unimaginable. And we as a country, if we're simply rational actors and we want to prevent future costs, we should absolutely view doing something about this problem as a mandate. If we are decent, caring citizens, we should view this as a mandate. There is just no, given what these children suffered, the extreme physical privations, trauma, mental health struggles that we documented in this book, there's just no way it is a reasonable strategy to repeat the mistake of the 1890s and do nothing.
It's pretty hard to argue that kids should be able to raise themselves up, yet we allow them to do that. Does it shock you still that so many people are willing to neglect our children?
Yes. In the debate over the child tax credit, there was this concern, there's an age-old pattern in American social policy, right? That we were terrified of producing dependents and a pauper class. And so in order to punish the adults into being self-sufficient, somehow we don't think we should enable them to become self-sufficient. We think we must punish them by making the alternative of work so unimaginably bad that they'll avoid dependency. And the kids are sort of, maybe we care about them a little, but we're so concerned with punishing the adults.
Catherine, the difference between the book, published in 2015 and 2023, what do you see? Is it worse?
We had kind of an unprecedented experiment during the pandemic, where poor households had, for a brief time, an expanded child tax credit, the kind of thing that Jeffrey's been and I have been advocating for. So we got it through for a brief period of time. And that was a monthly credit that went to parents of children. It was fairly substantial. They also received pandemic relief payments. And in fact, we saw hardship go down to unprecedented levels among families with children. But of course, all of that went away. And now we're going to see more pandemic era supports fading. If you look at the TANF system, stable. In the late 1980s, TANF served about 80 to 90% of poor families, and they were touched by the TANF system in some way. Back then, we called it a different thing, AFDC. It's now TANF. Even later, in the mid 1990s, it touched about 2/3 of all poor families with kids. Now that figure is about 20%. And in some states, it's in the single digits. In the state of Mississippi, last I looked, the TANF approval rate, the poorest state in the nation, the poorest kids in the nation, the TANF approval rate among those who applied was between 4% and 7%, depending on the year. Absolutely astonishing. And in fact, that it was that low TANF acceptance rate that led to the whole welfare scandal, where celebrities were taking TANF money, and people were just stealing millions of dollars from the TANF system. Finally came to light. It was and across the nation, TANF applicants are being rejected at unprecedented rates. Many states are only accepting applicants in the single digits. So we really don't have, as Jeffrey alluded to, we really don't have a cash welfare system in most places in the country. To argue that's meaningless is ludicrous. Labor force participation rates among single mothers have not improved enough to compensate. Those that can work full-time full year, they can claim the EITC, they do okay, but many, even in this economy, cannot manage to find or sustain full-time full year employment.
How do these people live in some? This is more or less your special expertise. How do they get along? How do the kids get along?
There are a number of strategies people deploy for getting by. Although selling SNAP, we know, is very rare in the nation as a whole. Among the $2 a day poor, it's quite common.
Selling SNAP, did you say?
Selling SNAP. It's complicated to sell your SNAP because you actually have to accompany the person into the grocery store. You don't want to give someone your card and then you wouldn't get it back when it was relocated.
SNAP being food stamps for people who...
But you only get about 60 cents on the dollar, or even 50 cents on the dollar for that strategy. And that means your family is going to go very, very hungry. So I'll make Hicks in the book. She does this routinely because she has no other cash income and she needs to pay her utility bill to keep the lights on, to keep the heat on. And so her kids, 10 days into the month, have no food. And these kids are so incredibly hungry. You know, Tabitha, her daughter, just speaks so eloquently about what it feels like to just be so hungry. I asked her this question and she said, it feels like you want to be dead.
Wow.
Just imagine a child feeling that they want to be dead because they are so hungry. She also ends up, and this is another example of what people have to do to survive. When she's in the 5th grade, teacher messages her on Facebook and says, "I've been watching you, waiting for you to mature." And then he offers her food if she'll come to his house and have sex with him. And she ends up stuffing her backpack with food and bringing it home to her little brother. This goes on for months until she finally breaks down and tells a teacher, who manages not only to get her out of the situation, but to get her into a private school in Memphis.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Also selling of blood plasma.
Blood plasma is big. Almost everyone we talked to had a little divot on the inside of their elbow from selling plasma. Jessica, one of our respondents from Appalachia, She's just this tiny little woman, and she weighs 1 pound more than the legal limit that you have to weigh in order to give plasma. This is the only source of cancer income for this family. And she comes back debilitated. She eats protein bars that the plasma clinic provides in order to pass the various blood tests to show that she's fit to donate. Other people, for about $1 an hour, this is both Paul and Jennifer Hernandez, pick up scrap metal and tin cans, rifle through garbage cans. These are people who are parents of children. They're scouring the neighborhood garbage cans and alleys for tin cans and old air conditioners, anything they can sell at the local scrap, the local scrap market.
Now, so Catherine, you say this whole idea, as many people, as Jeff often says, people say, why don't they just get a job? Why don't they just go to work? Many of these people did that, tried that.
Yeah. If you don't have a college degree, it is very difficult to get full-time, full-year work in today's economy, partly because employers don't want to pay your insurance. Part-time work is ubiquitous and it's fragile.
So what do we do about this, Catherine? Is it better jobs? Is it the child tax credit? Is it all of these things?
We know for more and more Americans that work doesn't work. So clearly finding a way to get more people into full-time, full-year employment is really important. But, a lot of those low-wage jobs don't have give. We all, especially as parents, need, and as daughters and sons of aging parents, we need some give in our jobs. So worker protections are really important, but the low-wage labor market is really broken. So that needs some serious attention. But we can't assume, it's always been a myth in the United States welfare state that anybody who wants a job can get one. It's never been true, even in the tightest economy, especially stable full-time, full-year work. So we have to make a provision for families who are doing a valuable service to society, and that is raising the next generation, young people who will be the workers who will pay for our retirement. We're taking the short view rather than the long view, and we're not investing in our children in nearly to the degree that we need to be. So something like the child tax credit is really a genius program, because virtually all parents need the help. Those are times in one's life when you're not at your prime earning capacity. You're in your 20s. Almost everyone struggles to make ends meet when they have younger kids. And it's a great time to say to those families, thank you. We support you. Similarly, with the expanded child tax credit, we saw parents spending money in ways that benefited kids, and not on alcohol and drugs.
Right, exactly. Would you go so far as to say that there should be a universal floor, universal support, cash for it?
Yes. I mean, I like the child tax credit because it sends a message that child rearing is valuable. Unconditional cash transfers for all Americans, sure, that would be nice. I'm not sure we can afford it. It's extraordinarily expensive, and we have to make some really fundamental trade-offs that we'd have to think hard about. But certainly for parents raising kids, they've earned it. And I think that's a message Americans would be receptive to. We were so close, but Joe Manchin thought his constituents would spend the money on drugs.
Or coal.
Yeah, coal.
Yes, I think you and Jeff agree on that. And in terms of this next Congress, the one that we're in, the 118th, any progress? I know everyone is still fighting like mad to make sure that it gets reinstated. Are you optimistic about that?
We might have to wait a couple of years.
That's a long time to be hungry for these children.
It's a long time to be hungry. Yeah.
Well, you've been great, Catherine.
It's such a delight to talk with both of you. So nice to meet you, Carol, and to see you again, Jeffrey. And I wish you luck with this podcast. You're doing God's work in keeping this issue front and center. And, I'm really hopeful that we can focus new energy and new creativity on both the jobs end and the safety net end.
Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
On February 7th, in his State of the Union address before Congress, President Joe Biden highlighted several family-related goals: paid family leave, childcare, universal pre-K, college education, affordable housing, and renewal of the 2021 expanded child tax credit that awarded monthly cash payments, was available to all families, and cut child poverty in half. But it lapsed.
With us now to give us a preview of the child tax credit in the 118th session of Congress is Ashley Burnside. She's a senior policy analyst at the Center for Law and Social Policy, otherwise known as CLASP. The organization's mission is reducing poverty, promoting economic security, and advancing racial equity. Ashley, thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
As an advocate of child tax credit, at least since 2015, I was pretty excited when it passed, and then poof. What's going to happen next, given you wrote a very clear piece about why Congress let it go in the first place? Is there a future for the CTC?
I think that this year, given the tight margins in Congress, I don't foresee a child tax credit bill going anywhere this year. I think that the debt ceiling fight is going to really take up a lot of the airtime, but I do know that there are some big child tax credit champions in Congress, like Representative DeLauro, Senators Brown and Booker and Bennett, and they are planning on reintroducing their bills that would implement a child tax credit expansion this year. But I don't foresee those bills moving this year. Hopefully this year can be a time where we can have Republicans and Democrats come to the table and build some consensus around why this policy is important and try to build around some nuts and bolts of what a child tax credit policy could look like in the years ahead. So I do think that there's a future to it, but maybe not as quickly as we'd like to see.
Apparently the Republicans are coming aboard. Well, a handful of Republicans are coming aboard, which I didn't expect. How important will their contribution be?
I think it's great that there are Republicans coming on board, and ideally I'd love to see every member of Congress. So it's only can help that we're seeing members like Senator Romney introducing their own bills. And of course, there are key differences in the bills that Republicans are proposing versus Democrats, and there still are only a handful of Republicans right now. But hopefully having both sides coming to the table supporting aspects of this policy can help us get to a place where we can come to a consensus that our nation should be investing in a child benefit for families with children, and that this is an important policy lever to reduce child poverty.
Ashley, talk to us about the things that we'll phrase it as Democratic Republican, approaches to this. One is the cash payment directly to families, and the other is who's eligible for it. And it somehow doesn't make sense that the poorest, in many instances, would not be eligible for it. Talk to us a little bit about that.
The key component there is whether or not the child tax credit has an earnings requirement or a work requirement that allows families to be eligible. When Congress temporarily expanded the child tax credit in 2021, they made it fully refundable, which means that families who have little to no earnings could access the credit. And this allowed the credit to reach families who have very low incomes. And that was part of what made it so effective at reducing child poverty in 2021. But under current law, the credit is only partially refundable. So families have to make a certain amount in earnings to be eligible to receive the child tax credit. And that means that if you have $0 in earnings, you're not eligible for a credit at all. And there definitely has been tension between members of Congress over whether or not a future child tax credit should be fully refundable and whether there should be work requirements in place for parents to access the credit. And the conversation does have really huge implications for whether or not this policy will be able to effectively address child poverty and whether it will really be targeted at the families with the lowest incomes.
Watching President Biden actually included in his State of the Union address was so exciting for me. I don't know. I just felt he said the words paid leave, childcare, pre-K, housing, other things as well. But the fact that he is fully supportive of the child tax credit, what difference does that make to people like you working in the field for this?
Yes, I definitely felt excited when I heard the words come out of his mouth during the State of the Union. I think it's really important to know that the White House also sees the potential in this policy and feels that it's important to include in their policy platform. To me, the State of the Union was really Biden setting his vision for what he wants to see in America, for families, for children. So for the expanded child tax credit to be a part of that vision was really uplifting for me. And I also was excited to hear about the other policies he was talking about that would support families, which he listed a lot of really important things.
Where do you think this fear of giving poor people cash comes from? Is this part of the national character of America? I guess I would argue it certainly has been for some time. Why do you think it's changed to some degree now?
It's an important question that could really cover a span of decades of policy about poverty in America. I think that unfortunately, for a long time, lawmakers and media and Americans have felt that cash programs going to families is going towards what's called the welfare queen. It's rooted in this racist assumption about families living in poverty who are deserving versus not deserving of support. And there's often been a patriarchal assumption about whether parents should be receiving cash from the government, whether they know how to spend cash, whether cash are going towards the quote unquote right things. And these are problematic stereotypes that are rooted in racism, rooted in classism, rooted in sexism, and they've been going on for generations. And I do think that the pandemic really showed us that, unfortunately, most families in America are only one financial emergency away from being in poverty or from being in a financial shock that could spiral them into circumstances out of their control. One broken car or one missed utility bill could put a family into poverty. And a lot of Americans were in a situation where they needed support from the government. The stimulus payments, the expanded unemployment insurance, those programs made a huge difference for families and were really a lifeline for people. And it provided a window where lawmakers could implement this temporary expansion to the child tax credit and show parents what it's like to have the government investing in you as you're raising your children, what it could feel like to have this reoccurring monthly payment that you could rely on and budget around to support your children. The policy, from the polls that I've seen, from the research that I've read, was very popular among parents. It made them feel like the government cared about them and supported them. It was policy that people really resonated with. And I think it really changed the scope of how people view government programs and investments for families. I hope that even as we leave this phase of the public health crisis and the pandemic, that families still see the urgency of passing policies like the child tax credit. It's something that we should be investing in even when we're not in a public health emergency or a recession.
There is now substantial evidence that people do spend for the kids' needs, not for themselves.
Yes, there's a lot of research that found that the most common ways parents reported spending those monthly payments was towards bills, towards food and groceries, towards rent and mortgage payments, towards activities for their children. And there really was no evidence that parents were spending it towards things like alcohol or substances. It really was going towards the needs of children and towards monthly bills.
So Ashley, looking forward to the 118th Congress these next 2 years, you have your champions in the Senate, Senators Brown, Booker, and Bennett, and you have your champions in the House, Delora Del Bene and Richie Torres. What can our listeners do to help push that along? What can the average citizen who is not engaged on a day-to-day basis, as you are, in the policy do to help move this along?
I think the biggest thing that listener can do is share their story. If you received the child tax credit in 2021 and it helped you raise your kids, it helped you make ends meet, sharing that story with your member of Congress, with the media, through letters to the editor, that helps explain the urgency of why this policy is so important for everyday people. And just talking to your friends and family about the policy and why it's important. And even if you're not a parent, but you one day hope to be, talk about how this policy would help you on your journey to being a parent, why you want to live in a country that invests in children and families. I'll also note that there's opportunities at the state level to pass state child tax credit policies. There are already about 10 states that have a state version of the child tax credit. And there's been a lot of states that have been proposing state CTCs this year, including some red states. So if you live in a state that's also proposing a state version of the credit, consider testifying at your state level as well and talking about how this policy could support you at the state and federal level.
In my book, I wrote a chapter called Cash Matters, Money Matters, which the anti-poverty policy people always argue is not the case. I think it sounds counterintuitive to people, but that's an issue or a theme that I would like to push much harder. Cash solves a lot of problems on its own.
Yes.
More cash.
Yes. And I think that we learned a lot of things from the temporary expansion of the child tax credit, but that really summarizes the biggest takeaway is providing cash to families is effective policy. It really works. 1 million children were lifted out of poverty under the age of 6 in 2021 because of the expanded child tax credit. 1.9 million children between the ages of 6 and 17. We also saw that food insecurity rates went down for families with children. Financial stress went down for parents. Parents reported that they were more easily able to afford monthly expenses. And that was just when the program was in place for 6 months. Imagine what it would look like for our families and communities if we invested in this policy permanently. There's so much research that shows that when you provide a household with cash while a child is at their earliest stages of childhood development, that has positive impacts for that child's health, for their education outcomes when they go to school, and even for their earnings as adults. So if you're really investing that cash into families from a young age, it has huge positive ramifications for the child and the parent.
No argument here.
Like you said, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's something you have to keep repeating.
Ashley, thank you so much. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. This has been very helpful.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to hear more from your podcast and to contribute.
Thank you. History will judge a nation's decency in various ways. One of them will surely be the well-being of all its children. American neglect of its poor children is both inexplicable and deplorable. By basic measures, it has the highest child poverty rate among rich nations in the world. A generation of careful academic research has shown how damaging this has been to children's cognition, health, nutrition, and future wages. In 2021, Congress and the President adopted an enlightened program that expanded the child tax credit and made it available to almost all children, no matter their race, ethnicity, or how little their parents earned. The results were stunning, cutting the poverty rate by half. But Congress refused to renew the program. In coming months, this podcast will examine the future of the child tax credit and other key policies to protect children from the destructiveness of poverty. We are dedicated to restoring a bright and optimistic future for all children in this land long celebrated for equal opportunity. Our thanks to Princeton professor Dr. Catherine Eden, author of $2 a Day, Living on Next to Nothing in America, and to Ashley Burnside of the Center for Law and Social Policy.
For more about erasing child poverty in America, go to our website, www.theinvisibleamericans.com. Jeff and I will see you here the next time on the Invisible Americans podcast.